Donna here. Hey, let's take a look at the garden. What I started out with doesn't look much like a garden. I had to clear out a lot of boulders and then I rototilled. I used a Sun&Snow TJ604E tiller, which worked great and it wasn't very expensive. It was like 125 bucks. Definitely saved me a lot of labor and maybe my back as well. A lot of universities that have agricultural programs offer soil testing. There's one up in Fort Collins that charges about $35 for a basic test, and I will leave a link to that below. That's what I would recommend. But I used a kit that I found on Amazon, and as you can see, my soil is very alkaline, which is typical for the Rockies. High pH impairs a plant's ability to take up nutrients, and that can lead to iron chlorosis and other deficiencies. When I researched acidifiers like sulfur and peat moss, I read that if you have free lime, which is basically a lot of calcium carbonate, acidic amendments probably won't put much of a dent in the pH. In that case, you may just be better off starting with new soil, doing raised beds rather than trying to treat the soil that you have. You can check this by adding a bit of vinegar to some dry soil. If it bubbles, your soil has free lime. Mine did, but I decided to go ahead and try the peat moss anyway. Peat moss has a pH of 3. I added about 3 cubic feet of that to my 16 by 20 foot area, and I also added a few cubic feet of compost from yard waste and steer manure. Rototilled it all in, and then I mounded 3 rows. The problem with peat moss is that it's commercially harvested faster than it's being naturally replaced. So I wouldn't recommend it if you already have neutral or acid soil or if you're putting in a huge garden. That said, for this application, I think it's perfect. Even though I do have some free lime, it worked great. I was able to grow tomatoes. I fertilized twice during the growing season with Job's tomato spikes, which I inserted into slits in the weed barrier, and I also sprayed occasionally with a liquid fertilizer. I used Kellogg's Organic Fish and Kelp. That seemed to work well and also seemed to reduce the number of flea beetles on the tomatoes. I used wood mulch for my walkways and also over the weed barrier. The mulch insulates the soil a little bit and it keeps the walkways from getting muddy. Eventually it's going to break down and provide additional organic material to the soil. The mulch was completely free. I just had to pick it up from a local landscaper. I use these IKEA Fracta bags. The large bags are the perfect size and they do a good job of keeping the mulch contained when you're transporting it. 10 by 20 is a very common size for a vegetable garden, and that would match the width of most hobby greenhouses. But I went with the 16 by 20 so I could fit a third row in. The weed barrier is 3 foot wide and my walkways are about 1.5 to 2 foot wide. Handy panels are a great way to use your space efficiently. They provide plenty of support for tomatoes, tomatillos, peppers, and eggplants. You could also grow beans, cucumbers, or peas. I used a post driver to pound each T-post in the ground, burying the spade. Then I attached the handy panels with these clips. These are all ever-built parts that you can get at Home Depot. And I really like these particular clips because you don't need a special tool to install them. To secure the vines, I used Velcro garden ties. They were really gentle on the plants and you can reuse them. To keep deer and bunnies out, I used red brand deer and orchard fencing. It conforms to uneven ground, which is real helpful if you're gardening in the mountains. It's flexible, but still heavy enough at the bottom that the bunnies can't push it up and they can't get through it because it has smaller openings at the bottom. The roll was really heavy. I believe it was about 70 pounds. I was able to make a gate just by fastening the fencing to a T-post. That acted like a hinge and attaching the loose end to the start of the fence with a couple of carabiners. You can get a better look at that at the beginning of the video. So if you're trying to keep things simple, that might be an option for you. What I don't like about this fencing is the barbs, which will catch on your clothes if you get too close. If I could do it again, I would use just standard welded wire fencing, which doesn't have the barbs, and it's much cheaper and easier to work with. Alongside that, I would run 3-foot tall hardware cloth, and that would keep the voles out as well as the rabbits if it's buried about 5 inches. This fence is only 5 foot tall. That's a height that deer can easily jump, but they didn't because there wasn't any safe place for them to land. With the handy panels in there, the space is all broken up. They didn't go in there anytime over the season. In Colorado, we have severe hailstorms every summer, and in Boulder, there's usually a couple in the June-July timeframe, although they can happen from any time between April through September. I used Ag Fabric anti-hail netting. It's made from HDPE, and I used small binder clips like from an office supply store to attach it to the handy panels. That worked great. We had a cold snap with lots of snow in early September, but once that passed, we had another month of just amazing weather. Fortunately, I was able to save my garden by placing water jugs around the plants and draping plastic over the handy panels. Definitely hoops or a greenhouse would have worked much better. And the plastic got weighed down by all the snow and ice, but it did the trick and it bought me another month or so. Whatever you decide to do for season extension, I'd recommend using polyethylene sheeting rather than polyvinyl so you don't get exposed to phthalates. Also, PVC reacts with some plastic covers, so steel is a better option for the support. Here's a layout of my irrigation system. I used 1/2-inch drip tubing, some regular 1/2-inch tubing, plus some straight and T connectors. This is another situation where you probably want to avoid polyvinyl. To terminate the ends, you can use these cheap slip-on pieces. They work, and you can remove them to drain the system, which you'll want to do before a hard freeze. Other than digging up the boulders, this is what I spent the most time on. The 1/2-inch diameter specification varies from brand to brand. At some point, I switched to Dig brand, which you can get at Home Depot, and I didn't have any problems with compatibility from within their brand, at least. The pressure reducer that came with my Rainbird kit leaked. I do like the mechanical timer, though. I'll check my rain gauge and take a reading with my soil moisture meter. If both are dry, then set it just like an egg timer, set it for like an hour. And you don't have to water every day. You just want to make sure that when you do water, you water long enough that the soil is deeply and uniformly saturated. And just be aware that can take a few hours. Okay, that's pretty much it for the technicals. Let me just share a little clip from last summer. Okay, coming to you live from the tomato jungle in Crooked. There we go. Yeah, these are Sweetie. They're a pole variety, and they're obviously cherry tomatoes. And these ones have really produced a lot for me this year. Clearly they're planted way too close, but it's been great because I'm getting about a colander of tomatoes every day for drying or fermenting or whatever. I've been doing a lot of preserving and giving them to neighbors and that sort of thing. So I definitely recommend the Sweetie tomatoes. One thing that I did that seemed to make a big difference with about half of them, that's how I know it made a difference, is I started them early. I planted them from seed, put them in the atrium, and then as they grew, I put them in new pots, and each time I removed the lower leaves and then buried that part of the stem. So that actually helps with the root development. So you get a healthier, bigger, more robust plant earlier on. To wrap it all up, I would say that this garden was a lot of work, but my happiest moments last summer were when I was out there picking tomatoes. It was just so beautiful, and I'm still enjoying the preserved harvest. In addition to the tomatoes, I had really good luck with the small-sized peppers like the shishitos and the small eggplants. I think that's the key with our short season. If you go for the smaller-sized vegetables, you're probably going to have better luck than if you go for the full-size peppers and tomatoes. The verdict? Totally worth it. I hope this helps you guys. Take care.